Hey, mom friends, wherever or however you're listening to this podcast right now, you should take a moment and check out Stitcher. Those of you listening on Stitcher already get why. For those of you who don't know it, Stitcher is a free podcast app for iPhone and Android and home to over 260,000 podcasts, including Mom to Life Plus Life. Wow. Stitcher also has smart recommendations, playlists, a car mode, and even a sleep timer. While the Stitcher app is free to use, they also offer a premium subscription service called Stitcher Premium that has exclusive bonus episodes from top shows, exclusive shows from top hosts, and ad-free listening for all for $4.99 a month or $34.99 a year. Pretty cheap. So, if you're into podcasts like Mom to Wife Plus Life, comedy, true crime, pop culture, sports, music, those types of things, I would highly suggest you go to stitcher.com/premium to sign up today and use promo code WifeLife. Again, go to stitcher.com/premium to sign up today and use promo code WifeLife on the monthly plan to get your first month free. How awesome and amazing is that? Make sure you use the promo code WifeLife to get it for free. All right. Hope to see you guys on Stitcher. Back to the show.
Hi, welcome to Mom to Wife Plus Life. This podcast is all about motherhood and life, and of course, everything in between. So if you're ready for some hot mess topics, rants, and life lessons, let's dive right in.
Hi guys, welcome back to Mom to Wife Plus Life. Today I have Kamini Woods on. She is a self-leadership and resilience coach. Kamini?
Sure. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I am Kamini Wood. I live in North Carolina. I am married and have 5 children. My oldest is 18, and then I have a 16-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So my life is very full, very busy. I'm also a certified life coach. I work with, generally speaking, high-achieving women and teens who are feeling stressed out and overwhelmed, trying to do it all, trying to live to expectations, live for external validation. They tend to be people pleasers and fixers. They are the perfectionists of the world who kind of take on the weight of the world on their shoulders. So they tend to be a little bit stressed and overwhelmed with that. So I work with them on just resetting their mindset, their behavior patterns, and realigning with who they are authentically, and also realigning with their internal resilience factor so that they can meet adverse situations. And so, that's a little bit about me and what I do. I'm also the mom to 2 dogs, so I am definitely a dog person, as an aside.
Nice. I love it. 5 kids. Wow. I have one, and we're talking about having another one. So I'm just like, I don't know. But yes, I personally couldn't do 5 kids. Maybe babysit, but like physically have them all the time? No. That's just too overwhelming for me.
I lovingly refer to my house as the zoo, and it's all good. It's all good.
So today we're going to be talking about expectations and relationships and boundaries. So can we dive in a little bit about living expectations or external expectations and external validation?
Yeah. So a lot of times when we are the high achievers or the people pleasers, what we do is we live to these external validations. And what I mean by that is we're looking outside of ourselves to either feel good enough or feel like what we're doing is okay. And what ends up happening is it becomes a behavior pattern and a mindset pattern where we precondition ourselves to look for that. And if we're not receiving that validation, or we don't receive it in the way that we want it or expect it, then the story we end up telling ourselves is we're not good enough, or we're failing, or somebody's mad at us. And then it just snowballs from there. And what ends up happening is not only do we start feeling bad about ourselves, but that also then snowballs into our relationships and how we show up in our relationships with people, not just romantic relationships, but even parent relationships, workplace relationships, and friendships, because our barometer that we're measuring ourselves is external. And the shift to the internal barometer is what is so important, to remember to live to our own personal expectations and validate ourselves for ourselves. When we're constantly looking outside of ourselves, that's when we get lost, truthfully.
Nice. I completely agree with that, because I'm sitting here like thinking to myself, I'm like, wow, I do that because I, for the longest, wanted to meet my mom's expectations. So I kind of lived those kind of expectations that she had for me. But then I realized those were not for me. Those were not things that I was passionate about and things that I really wanted to do. So I was kind of just lost for a while. So I totally feel that.
Yeah, and to that point, as a parent, one of the things that I work with people on from a parenting coaching standpoint is also recognizing when we put our own projections on our kids, right? Because our kids are looking at us as parents as we know everything. There comes a point in time, right, where they realize, oh my goodness, okay, my parents are flawed. But when they're young, they're looking to us as though we are the all beings, And so as parents, what happens is we end up putting our own projections and our own expectations on our children, and it's a balancing act, right? It's learning to recognize that, giving your kids as they grow that space to be like, oh, okay, you as your own individual human, need to figure out what it is that you would like to accomplish, regardless of me as your parent, what my expectations would be.
Yeah, I personally do that with my kid now. My husband doesn't really agree with me. He kind of feels like we should kind of direct her into a career. And I'm like, no, let her be whatever she wants to be when she grows up. As long as she's happy and, successful at it, I really don't care,
Yeah, can I talk to that for a quick second?
Go ahead.
So my oldest actually is striving to be a professional ballerina, which is not the norm, right? The norm is you go through high school, and then you go to the top tier school that you can get into, and then you go and you get a job, right? There's this path that most people are supposed to take. And I will say that as a parent, you have your own pressures, the external pressures of what do you mean you're going to allow your child to explore going and dancing professionally? What do you mean you're not having her go to college first? And as a parent, it was an interesting crossroads for my husband and I to cross, where it was you don't have to follow a linear path. It's okay. And so right now she's actually just finishing up high school. She's graduating early. And so she's in the process of auditioning for companies. Now, granted, it is crazy competitive, and how many kids actually get those jobs is a slim number. So yes, she is also applying to college because you want to keep all doors open.
Yeah. But
what we had to learn as parents is there's not necessarily one linear path for every single person. So
yeah, that's how I feel, because growing up, I wanted to be a teacher. It sounds crazy. I can't handle kids, but I really wanted to be a teacher, and I even went to school for it, and I did internships for it, and then I realized I don't really like kids that much. So I really don't want to do this as a career.
Right. Right.
So I found it better to just maybe babysit, do daycare programs, volunteer every once in a while, but all day, 5 times a week, I'm good. I can't do it. So I'm actually in the process of going to school to become a real estate agent, because I feel I want to help people get their dream home, and I like decorating. I like helping people in that sense. So that's where I'm at right now. But teaching was my career path, and my mom was so encouraging of it. And I was like, okay, cool. This is what she wants. This is what I want. You know, it's cool. And then when I actually went to college, I was like, this is not for me. So, but I
and you know what's crazy is that a lot of people don't stop and say, this is not for me. They'll continue doing it, right? And then they get to like middle age and they're just sitting there going, okay, why am I so unhappy, or why do I feel stuck? And it is that exact thing. They lived to these external expectations, or they lived to somebody else's expectation of them, and they were fulfilled it, and they did it with great gusto, but they weren't really truly interested in it or really wanted to do it. So
exactly. It was just, nope, this is not for me. And you know, my mom was so disappointed, but you know, we battled for a long time for that, and I think that honestly shaped our relationship now. But it was not for me. I couldn't do it.
Well, I celebrate you for recognizing what it is that was not making you happy.
Yeah, I mean, because I really thought, like, okay, maybe I'll just do, like, younger kids. Because, you know, younger kids are cute, and you can, like, oh, they're so cute, they're so adorable. Maybe that was what I was thinking. Like, maybe it's just not the older kids I want to be with. I want to be with the cute little ones, you know? And even that was like, nope, kids, not for me. Nope.
No, I will just say as an aside, I give teachers so much respect because what they do in a classroom day in and day out is phenomenal.
Yeah. So
I mean, I cannot say enough about the teachers and what they do in the classrooms.
Oh yes, I commend teachers 100%. I'm just like, ooh, just the whole process of even becoming a teacher is like, I don't want to say hard, but it's difficult because you really sit there and you're like, what age group do I want to teach? And you're stuck with that age group or you're not, and then you have to kind of go retrain yourself to go to a different age group. But it's like, no, thank you. So I commend teachers, especially high school teachers, because that's like the worst age. Like, you know, the hormones, the teenagers, no.
Yeah, I mean, their problems are a little more complicated.
Yeah. So relationships, because I kind of touched on like me and my mom's relationship. How is it how important it is to like, I don't know, like, I guess feel whole with that relationship, whether it's a parent-child, a friend-to-friend, or even like a relationship, like a husband and wife type of situation.
So the way that I feel that this really affects relationships is learning to become whole in yourself first. It's really difficult to show up to a relationship when you are so outside of yourself in terms of defining who you are or looking for somebody else to complete you. It's, you know, if you think of that movie, have you seen Jerry Maguire?
Yeah.
I don't know. People have seen Jerry Maguire, but like there's that line that says, "You complete me." And it's like, and everybody's heart melts like, oh my gosh, you complete me. That's so sweet. But the issue that I take with that statement is you have to be complete on your own so that then when you show up into a relationship, no matter what type of relationship, you're coming from a place of wholeness. And so when I work with people, for instance, it is learning to break certain patterns that are not serving them, whereby they are looking outside of themselves for certain things or feeling like they're not good enough, and breaking that thought pattern and figuring out ways to create their ownership and empower them as their own individual human. Because when they then show up to the relationships, whether it be, you know, with your parent or with a coworker or with a friend or a romantic relationship, whether, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, or spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it may be, you are coming from a place of wholeness. Because it's really difficult to, you know, be in a cohesive relationship when you're constantly looking to the other person to fill something in you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I have to do this a lot because I'm pretty sure my listeners know about me a lot. It's just I was in a domestic violence relationship for the longest, like 7 years, on and off. So I always, like, I don't want to say, because my expectation of a relationship is like, you know, loving, 50-50, you know, things like that. So I was looking for that, and then I totally got something different. So I kind of had like self-doubt, felt like I wasn't good enough, and I was always looking to him for like, am I doing something good? Is this right? Like the validation aspect of it. So when I got out of that relationship, it was really hard for me to date because I didn't know how to not have my own validation for myself.
Yeah.
So it was really hard. And now when I got married and I met my husband, I kind of still had those tendencies. And even now being married, I still have those tendencies, but then I have to kind of take myself away and be like, look, this is not what we're doing anymore. We're not looking for validation from a spouse or anything like that.
I mean, that's a huge part of what I do. So I actually am working in the term is conscious uncoupling, but what my take on that is not necessarily conscious uncoupling from another person necessarily. It's conscious uncoupling from a pattern that you had. Mm-hmm. And so what it does is it recenters you into a new way of looking at yourself and how you show up into relationships, so that you are not repeating past behaviors and past patterns. And when you do get into a new relationship, you are able to come from a totally different place rather than the same situation. And it happens a lot in toxic relationships where you think that you're not good enough, and that victimization is so strong. And so the work that I do is like, let's break that down. Let's really dissect where that's coming from, and then let's reset it. So the next time that you are entering into a relationship, you're coming from a completely different, thought space.
Can you give me maybe 5 tips or 5, ways to kind of do that? Or, just for the listeners that are in toxic relationships that probably are ready to leave or just, finding themselves again?
So truthfully, the first step is to acknowledge to yourself that you're ready for change. I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that you have to be willing and ready to do the icky work that's going to come with it. The second thing that I would offer up is taking a step back and saying, okay, how did I contribute to the situation that I'm in? Now, I would never say that somebody is responsible for ever being abused. Mm-hmm. That's not what I'm saying at all. What it is, though, is that the way that we show up can covertly put us in a position to then take it, right? So, for instance, the concept of enabling. It's like, oh, I'm being abused, and then I'm the way that I'm showing up, and basically not setting boundaries, for instance, or not saying, I'm not going to take this, and it's not, and I'm not ever going to say that it's easy to stand up to somebody who is abusing you, but it's, it is then figuring out, where is my support system, and let me lean on that support system, and let me figure out, okay, what actions am I taking that could have covertly contributed to the situation that I'm in. And once you're starting to get to that place where you're like, okay, this is how I have been showing up, then you can start going through and saying, where is that coming from? Where's that story even coming from? Dealing with that, breaking that down, and then working through. And a lot of times when people are in these really toxic relationships, they do need support, whether it be a therapist or a coach like myself, where they have that dedicated, safe space to work through it. But it really does start with recognition that something has to change, and willingness to do it. That is just, that's key. Because if you're not there and you're not willing to take those steps to figure out, okay, how am I showing up, and what am I willing to go through to change this, and then stepping into your power, those are the keys to fixing it.
Nice. I love that. I love how you say find a support system, because for me, one of the hardest things, and I don't mean to be dark and gloomy about this topic, but one of the things for me was he alienated from me all my friends and family. So I didn't have that for a while. So I had to rebuild those things again. Yep. And, and it's just one of those hard things. So, yeah, I love how you said.
No, you're absolutely right, though, because when you're in a toxic relationship, you get isolated, and the family and friends that you used to be close to, suddenly you look around and you're like, they're not here. But what that is you recognize them and be like, okay, I'm going to reach out, because what happens a lot of times is those family and friends really do want to be there for you. They're just not right at your fingertips because they've been pushed away. But all it takes is for you to start reaching back out.
Nice. I love that. So let's talk about like the parent-child relationship, because we do have a lot of moms here and listeners and that have children. So how is it to like feel and pull for like the parent-child relationship, or figuring that out, and the expectations, validation, and all of those things?
So the parent-child relationship is a complex one, because when they're little, we have to do most things for them, right? And then we get to this stage where they're throwing a lot of temper tantrums, and at that stage, it's because they are trying to physically become independent. And then we end up going through this tantrum stage again in the teenage years, but it's not because they're trying to be physically independent. It's because they're trying to become emotionally independent. And so as parents, it's really hard because, you have this baby and you want to protect it and him or her, and you feel this sort of like, well, I'm the mom or I'm the dad, and like, you're my child. Yes, they're your child, but truthfully, it's learning to step back and being like, I'm here to be their guide rather than I own them. You know what I mean? Or like, they're mine. They are a human, and your job is to help guide them to become the best version of themselves that they can become. And it's also learning in a sense that, yes, we also want our child to be happy, which is true. But again, what is happiness? Each person needs to define it for themselves. Like, I can't determine whether my child is happy and be responsible for their happiness. I can contribute to it, but I ultimately cannot be responsible for it, because as they grow into these individual humans, they have to make choices, and they have to be responsible for their own happiness and for the direction that their life takes. Again, not to say that we step back and like, oh, go do whatever you want. You want to get involved in drugs? Great, no problem. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that it's this push and pull between learning, like, the fact that we're there to guide versus we don't own, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it makes sense, because I'm at the point where my daughter, she's 9, and I feel it's a little too early for the tween phase, but she's there, unfortunately. So she's kind of like, no, Mom, I can do this on my own. I'm just like, oh, well, last week you were asking me to help you. And it's just like, it's kind of like I want to protect her from everything, and I can't because I have to let go. So I'm learning to let go. I'm not sure if she's learning to let go, but it's so hard.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I just had this conversation with my 16-year-old. The analogy I gave him was, you're kind of like on this one-lane road, right? And you're paying attention to the track, because he just got his license, so driving analogies work with him. So I'm like, you're paying attention to your lane of traffic and maybe the oncoming traffic. I've been in this world a little bit longer than you, and I've been paying, like, my job is to kind of keep track of you and your siblings. So I'm more of like on a 4-lane, 5-lane highway. And so I'm not just looking at my lane. I have to keep track of like what's coming at us from the sides and all this stuff. And I get that you want so badly to be considered an adult, but you're not there. You're not there ready to merge onto that 4 or 5-lane highway yet. You're going to get there. But what we need to do is give you the tools to learn how to manage this 1-lane road and this oncoming traffic that you've got going on. And then as you start building those tools, you will be ready to merge onto that highway. So like, I use that analogy for him to say, I hear you and I recognize that you want to do certain things. And as you're on this 1-lane road, it's going to get more crowded, for instance. There's going to be more traffic. And you're going to build up the traffic, and eventually you'll be ready to merge. But for now, as a parent, I'm going to keep track of those lanes for you. And so that's the analogy that I gave him. And it seemed to work in terms of recognizing, first that you start off on this very country road, and then you start getting into the city, and then eventually you end up on the highway. But nonetheless, like, parents have to also learn that there is going to be a point in time where, you let that child merge, because they're no longer a child at that point, right? They're ready to manage their own highway and manage the things that are coming at us. And like all adults, there are times when things are not going to go the way that we want them to. And that's when, the concepts of self-compassion and forgiveness and learning and all that comes into play. So. Yeah.
Hey peeps, while we're taking a quick break from the podcast episode, my question to you is, have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Well, I had that same question, and I have an answer for that. So when I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had a lot of questions. I mean, too many questions to count. How do I record an episode, for example? How do I get my show into all the apps that people like to listen to, like Google, Spotify, all those places? How do I make money from this podcast? I think that's most of the goal for most people. The answer to every one of these questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free. I'm going to say that one more time. 100% free. And ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. This means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. I love Anchor so much. It's so easy. I can use it from my mobile phone, or I can actually use it from my desktop computer. It's perfect for those conversations on the go or those last minute scheduling podcast episodes with guests. So if you've always wanted to start a podcast and make money by doing it, go to anchor.fm/start. Again, that's anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. I can't wait to listen to your podcast episodes. Back to the show. So to finish up the parent-child conversation, can I just ask, is it more harder to have that let go of that independence if you have like a strong-willed go-getter child? Because I have one of those, and it's so hard for me to just kind of let go because, like I said, she's 9, and I feel like it's really young for her to be in this tween phase already, but she's been independent since day one. So it's kind of like I acknowledge that, but then a part of me is like, I can't acknowledge it. So I don't know. I just want to know if it's like extremely more hard when you have that kind of child, I guess, the strong-willed ones, because I know there's some mamas out there that just, they have a strong-willed child. And I don't want to say all children are strong-willed, but, most of them are more than the others. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it all is perspective and how people, like how they see their own reality.
Okay.
I actually have some strong-willed children, and I have some quieter children, and I would say that there are struggles and challenges as a parent, because ultimately what it comes down to is our fear of failure. And that's the common denominator. So I don't think one is easier than the other. I think that it's all the experience that we are personally having that gives it its meaning, if that answers that question.
Okay.
I really do think that it's, again, our own thoughts become our reality, right? And so however we're showing up and we are interpreting the things that we're experiencing is how it's going to feel and how we're going to experience it.
Okay, I see it, because I do. I'm not gonna lie, I do project my fears onto my child, but it's just like you said earlier. You've kind of been down that road, It's like I see it. I can foresee things, and they can't.
Right.
So it's like
right.
The caution light.
Right, and it comes back down to that ultimate, that sort of innate. I want to protect. I want to keep you from being upset and being hurt. And I was there. I remember the first time when I had my first child, I sat in that hospital room. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to keep you from ever being hurt. And it was a very naive thought, because the truth is we can't keep our children from being hurt. We can be there to support them, and we can be there to catch them. But unfortunately, we can't keep them. And because part of being hurt too is the learning that comes out of it, right? Right? Like they talk about the 5 stages of grief, for instance.
Yeah.
Well, the 6th stage, in my opinion, is, okay, what's the meaning, or what did I learn from that? And so through hurt, it's, what can I take away from this? What can I learn, and it comes down to I had heard somebody say this, I believe it was Sean Stevenson. He said, life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. And that's something that I really anchor into when talking to my clients too. It's like and it's not to be all woo-woo and like, oh, everything happens for a reason. It's just, it's learning to make meaning out of things, or at least take a lesson and be like, okay, this is happening for me and not just to me, if that makes sense.
I like that. That's really nice. I'm going to have to put that on my wall somewhere because I like that. Life happens for you. Like, because, I like that. I'm really going to have to get that on my wall. But yes. So I kind of want to dive into boundaries because I feel like everybody struggles with boundaries. I struggle with boundaries. Children struggle with boundaries. Everybody struggles with boundaries. So how do we set up boundaries?
Yeah, that's a huge question, right? Because, as myself, as a, people-pleasing perfectionist myself, it's like, the thought of saying no to somebody or like, I can't do that has been a huge challenge. And it's because, again, we come back to those external expectations or the avoidance of conflict, right? Because we don't want to upset the apple cart. And it's learning to say what works for me and being able to effectively communicate it. When you're putting up your boundaries, you don't have to be rude or obnoxious about it, but it's simply saying, for instance, this happens all the time for moms, right? Like at school functions, can you bake, 2 dozen cupcakes, and you hear about it on Thursday and they want them by Friday. And a lot of us are like, oh my gosh, okay, fine, I'll do that. But like, it's slowing down and be like, can I actually do that? Like, do I have the time to do this? Or is this going to actually be like overwhelming for me? And being able to just calmly say, I would really love to do that. I unfortunately can't bake those cupcakes this time. Please let me know the next time something comes up when you need that support. And it's learning to like slow down before saying yes to things. Yeah. And recognizing that it doesn't make you a bad person to say this doesn't work for me at this particular time, or that particular thing doesn't fit in with, my value system. And again, it doesn't mean you have to be obnoxious in saying it. You can be very polite, but it's simply, no is a complete sentence. Right?
Right. It is. I struggle with boundaries a lot, especially that whole parent-teacher thing. And because I feel, I feel like my child guilts me into it more than the teacher does. Because my child will come to me and be like, Mom, you haven't helped out all year. This will be your one chance to do it. And I'm like, peer pressure.
Yep. Yeah. No, I get it. It happens. I've had that too.
And
I totally get it. Yep.
And sometimes I have to kind of, this is the way I get out of it without actually saying no, which is bad. I need to work on it. But I usually go, well, I'll have an answer for you within the next hour.
So you're kicking the can down the road.
Because then I can really either hype myself up for it, or I can just completely be like, I'm sorry, that's just not going to work,
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. I've been there too, for sure. But I think that's part of the uncomfortability of breaking an old pattern though, right? It's just being like, I would totally love to do that. But unfortunately, at this point in time, that's not going to work for me. Yeah. And, and being able to say, like, it doesn't mean that I do not support you in school, or I love you any less, or I'm not as, into your classroom as I want to be. It's that right now I've got some other things happening, and I can't bake the 2 dozen cupcakes tonight.
Yes. Can we talk about like parents? Well, I want to say not parents, because I kind of want to dive into more like the relationship part. Because I feel like we all have relationships of some sort. How do you set up boundaries, whether it's like a friend-to-friend relationship or like a spouse relationship? Because I struggle with those the most, like hardcore.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I really do think that boundaries and expectations are very intertwined from my perspective, because what ends up happening a lot of times is we have expectations of others, and we don't communicate them. And they have expectations of us that go uncommunicated. So I think that this concept of expectations, communication, and boundaries are so intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
So when dealing like with friends, for instance, it's learning, again, it comes down to being able to communicate what works for you and what doesn't, and doing it in a very respectful way. But like, for instance, with friends, like we can have expectations of how they should call us a certain number of times, or they could have that of us. And for instance, that might be a boundary that we need to set kind of at the get-go, or even as we're experiencing the uncomfortability, not letting things ride. A lot of the boundary issues pop up because in avoidance of conflict, we don't set our boundaries and we keep going down this path and we kind of sweep it under the rug, and eventually whatever it is going to explode. And this happens a lot of times in relationships, like romantic relationships, where we don't want to make the other person upset, so we just kind of push it aside. We don't make waves. We don't upset the apple cart, so to speak. And eventually the explosion that happens is much greater than if we had just dealt with the original conflict. And that original conflict could just be a boundary issue, like, hey, again, like this doesn't work for me, or I can't do that right now, or, I can't, with friends, for instance, it's a lot of friends have expectations of how many times you should call or text, or, if you text, do they expect me to text right away? And it's sort of setting up that boundary. Like for me, text is a great mechanism for my communication because that means I can get back to you when it's convenient for me. And of course you find a very polite way of saying it, but you set up that boundary that says, hey, I'm not going to respond to a text immediately, right? Because again, that's a line that you're drawing. And it's not like, we can't be friends, but it's a line that says, if you have this expectation of me, I'm not going to meet that. Is that okay with you? And that happens in relationships too, is, that communication, that sort of like, I have these expectations. Can you meet them? It gives the other person the ability to say, yes, I can, or no, I can't. And then you deal with it if the answer is no. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think for me, and I'm just speaking on myself because I can't speak for our listeners, but as an example, I'll just use myself. I think for me, especially like in a friend-to-friend relationship, I feel guilty if I say no. And I think the guilt overtakes the actual of me saying no. So is that a common thing, or is that like, just something that's personal to me?
No, I think it's so normal. I think a lot of us fight this concept that if we say no, we're making the other person upset and we're taking responsibility for how they're feeling. And it's recentering ourselves and remembering that we are ultimately not responsible for how somebody feels or what they think. Again, we can contribute to it, but we're not ultimately responsible for it. So in terms of when we say no, if we're saying no with all good intention and not trying to be hurtful or mean or nasty, then we're ultimately not responsible for how they take that. And it's learning what's ours to carry and what's not, if that makes sense.
Yes. So like for that instance, because I don't want to say like in a relationship, the guilt kind of makes you say yes, like a yes person, and you're doing things that you wholeheartedly don't feel passionate about doing. So how would you set up a boundary in a relationship aspect? Because now you guys have come together, you guys have made this commitment. I feel like a relationship, and I'm just going to say this, a relationship, you've made a commitment. With a friendship, you've kind of made a commitment, but it's kind of like as is commitment. Like this, it could dwindle, it could go further, it could not. It's it's like as if things. But a relationship, you expect something out of it. So if you don't, my point is that if you don't set up a boundary, is there more of a guilt to that feeling, or is it just like communication that you guys need to set off right off the bat type of thing? I'm not sure if you get what I'm trying to say, but
I think I do.
Okay.
And it goes back to the point that I made. It goes back to the point that I made about my work too, with like the conscious uncoupling and like how you uncouple from past patterns. So you can get into a relationship and you could have not set up certain boundaries, and you can have been doing things and kind of saying yes because you wanted to please the other person. It doesn't that the relationship has to go kaboom and end and be like, well, we can't be together anymore. You can uncouple from those past patterns and behaviors, but what that comes down to is coming to terms with it on your own first, like becoming whole and realizing, okay, this is how I've been showing up. This pattern doesn't work for me anymore. And then communicating it to your partner and recognizing that it may be that your partner is like, oh, but that doesn't work for me anymore. And so now this relationship doesn't work. But your partner could also then meet you and say, oh, okay, I understand. And you work together at that point to rebuild. It's a rebuilding of the relationship just with different patterns in place and different boundaries in place. Just because you've shown up a certain way for years doesn't mean that you're not allowed to change. So there's nothing, yes, you've made a commitment to this other person, but there's never a commitment to having to be in a certain way, because that would preclude your own self-growth and your own evolution of you as a human. And so what it is just communication and learning to, and there's this concept out there about nonviolent communication, and where it's like, you're not asking the other person, you're not, defending yourself or justifying or arguing, and you're also not asking them to do the same thing. Like, you're not asking them to defend, argue, or justify how they've shown up, but it's coming to a point where you have this open lines of communication and being like, okay, this was how I've been showing up. This is no longer working for me. This is the changes I'd like to start making, and meet each other in that respect.
Got it. I like how you put it that way too, because I feel like I say that to my husband a lot. And it's like, it's like a seasonal thing for me, because it's like, right now I'm like, this part of the season, we're going to disinfect the house, we're going to clean, and I expect you to do the same thing. And he sits on the couch and I'm like, what are you doing? We're supposed to be cleaning. And then when I'm like, I just don't want to do this anymore. And then that's when he's like, but you said, but you can, and it's like, no, look, my boundary is I'm burnt out now. Like, it's your turn.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and it's it's communicating like, I need support.
Yeah, I need support. Yeah, and sometimes
I need support.
It's just a hard battle, because it's like you set up this expectation and these boundaries, and then sometimes you just don't get it back in return. And I think that's the hardest part for me in my relationship right now, is I struggle with that. I think he hears me. I really do. I know he does. But, part of me thinks
it comes down to this concept that I usually talk about, which is non-attachment, right? It's like you put your boundary and you communicate all you can, but then you at some point have to not be attached to how the other person responds to it, because the problem is that we're so attached, like, well, now I did this, so you need to do X. So that means that you're still attached to the outcome and the expectation of what's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
It's then practicing the concept of non-attachment. Like, okay, I put this out there, now it's on you. What are you going to do with this?
Oh my goodness, yes. So we've actually come to the point where I let you ask me questions. So go ahead and ask me whatever questions you would like.
Well, I would love to hear about, what you have done with, is like, I'm very curious about your past history, if you're willing to share, in terms of, how did you find your way out of the domestic violence relationship? Because for me personally, in the work that I do, I find that I learned so much from the women who are able to really get themselves out of that situation. And I would love to just hear a little more about that, if you're willing to share.
Yeah. So it actually, so I'll make it short, but it actually got to a point where I was going to therapy, and I quote unquote called it a doctor's appointment, like once a month, because he wouldn't technically let me go to therapy. So I called it a doctor's appointment, like my womanly checkup once a month. So I went to that, and it got to a point where my therapist was like telling me, like, I wasn't really acknowledging it because I grew up like this, like accepting that, love is hurt, basically if they hurt you, they kind of love you type of thing. So I kind of got a wake up call from my therapist saying, this is not normal. This is not okay. He's controlling you. He's, basically you can't even come to your own doctor's appointment without, him having some kind of control over that. And it just kind of made me realize, like, yeah, I can't even go see a doctor. This is kind of extremely controlling. So I did reach out to my daughter's principal teacher at that time, head director at her Head Start. She was like 4 or 5, and pre-K, I guess, yeah. And I basically told her I did not want to leave and go back into the car with him. So, because I just didn't feel safe anymore. And I knew that if I went back to his house, it was going to either be a fight or I was going to be homeless. So I couldn't do it. So basically she agreed to keep my daughter while I got back in the car with him. And I told them, like, oh, she's staying for an after-school activity or something like that. I lied and something like that. And I had my friend go pick up my daughter, and basically I packed up my stuff while he was at work and left. So it was one of those things where I kind of had to, like, make strategic moves and lie blatantly to his face. So it was one of those things where I had to, like, really trust the people that I was reaching out to. Yeah. And I honestly, I didn't know this friend at the time. I met her through, like, a mom's group or something like that at the school. Barely knew her name. But I was like, our kids play together. Can you take my kid? Type of thing. And I basically put the trust in these two people. And I was like praying to God that nobody would, like, call the cops or, like, put me in a women's shelter or CPS or anything like that, because that's the ultimate fear that we have. Because that was my fear, was that, he was going to win. He was going to take my kid away. And I would be this mom struggling to prove that this domestic violence was happening, this emotional abuse was happening, which was actually really hard in the court because the court didn't see anything wrong with it, surprisingly. Because apparently he never abused a child, so technically I didn't have any ground, which to me is bananas. So courts work like that in a funny way. So it's just like one of those things where I kind of felt defeated after I left, and it took 2 months for me to actually get a restraining order and, like, hey, there's physical violence. Like, look, my kid has a black eye now. Like, I wasn't lying when I told you these statements, things like that. Because I wasn't being abused anymore. So now he took it out on my kid.
On your kid, yeah.
So it's one of those things where I say if you have a kid and for domestic violence survivors or people who are in a situation right now, if you have a kid and that kid has a friend, reach out to that parent because they're they're probably not your, like, best friends, but they're probably the ones that can help you get out of a situation faster and better than, like, your family or your personal friends that you know. So
amazing. Yeah. It's interesting, though. I was listening to you, and one of the things you said is you put all this trust in these two people. But what I'm also hearing is you had to put so much trust in yourself. Yeah. And you did.
Yeah, I got to a point where it was 7 years, and I had to realize, I was like, is this going to be the rest of my life? Or, because now my daughter is aware. She's talking. She's learning, the learning stage. So I didn't want her to learn that this was the okay route for anything, because, I wanted to break the cycle. I wanted to not be that way. So.
Amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're amazing.
Thank you. But it's hard. It was hard. It was really, really hard. It's still, like, to this day, I still have, like, flashbacks. I still have the PTSD and all that from it. So there's patterns that I still do. That's why I'm, like, still trying to like, figure out, like, how do I set up boundaries? Because, like, you know, boundaries that I had back then.
It's turning that PTSD, right? It's turning that PTSD into this concept of post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
No longer is it a post-traumatic disorder. Now you're going to turn it into growth. Yeah. And I love that. I love that you're starting to look at it that way. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. Not a walk in the park, but it's one of those things where, like, I cry about it and then I journal about it and then I kind of like, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to, you know, kind of have kind of crazy talk to myself. But yes.
No, I mean, I think that's wonderful. I mean, you have to allow yourself the emotions. The longer we try to put our emotions in a container, again, they just will eventually bubble up. Like, we have to learn that it's okay to have the emotions that we're having, give them the space that they need to be there. And so, like, a lot of times, like, yes, brain dumping is great because you get to just get it all out of your brain onto a piece of paper, you know, and then it's the concept of, like, do you take that piece of paper and rip it up? What do you do with that piece of paper? You know, those types of things that you end up different practices that people put into place to kind of start moving past certain emotions. So anyway.
Thank you. Any more questions? Sorry. I kind of like took the spotlight.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. I really do. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
I know that it's probably not the easiest thing to talk about, but I also celebrate you for talking about it because I think a lot of times we tend to hide things because of shame and guilt, and it's, you know, until we bring it into the light, are we able to actually work through it and move past it? So, thank you. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to hear.
I finally got to a point where I can talk about it without crying. So, I feel like that's kind of growth in itself. You know, like I'm not teary-eyed or crying about it. I'm more like, this is what you should not do type of thing. So, I feel like I grew in that sense, and you know, talking about it makes it easier that I can actually, because my husband doesn't know the full story, so he knows bits and pieces. So it makes it easier now that I can kind of tell him a little bit more without like crying about it and making him feel like, oh snaps, I didn't mean to ask you that, you know?
Right.
I feel like I got to that place right now, but I still like will not give him the full story. I mean, I'm not sure if he listens to the podcast episodes, but he hasn't said anything. So when he does, I mean, but you know, he probably will internalize it and just kind of like realize, you know, because I did something the other day where like I think he reached for like my neck or something, and I flinched. And he was like, what happened? And I was like, I don't know. And, you know, it just kind of made me, like, I guess I had a flashback that I didn't even realize was happening. And I just kind of, like, you know, just natural reaction, like, don't touch me there. But, you know, I trust my husband. So it was kind of weird that I even did that. But that just shows that, like, I'm not completely healed all the way.
Yeah. And our bodies have memories, right?
Yeah.
Like our physical body remembers certain things. And so, yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. And it does take time. It takes time to heal, and it's learning to give yourself that grace, you know, the grace to be able to heal. So, yeah.
So I'm going to ask you 3 random fun facts about yourself. And you can be anything, literally anything, to where, I mean, like, if you like a lot of salt or pepper, it's like anything like that, you know, type of thing.
Right. Well, my random facts are probably around food. Isn't that silly? For instance, I love salt. So, like, salt bagels are my thing. And I'm also a chocolate fiend. Like, I cannot get enough chocolate, and people, like, my children have to hide it from me in the house. And then I did sort of share that idea that I'm a dog person, but, like, I put voices to different dogs that I meet. I'd love to, like, figure out, like, if they were able to talk, like, what type of voice would they have? So, I do think that my kids think I'm a little bit nuts because I come up with these random voices for dogs, like random dogs on the street. So, yeah, that's probably a pretty quirky thing about me. But
I love it. I mean, like, I have conversations with my cat, so it's like, And my daughter and my husband will look at me like, she doesn't understand me. I'm like, yes, she does. She does. We have a bond.
She does.
Have a bond.
That's right.
So I love it. I
for
do.
Sure.
Where can they find you and interact with you and talk to you more about your coaching and all of those things?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So they can find me on the web. My website is www.itsauthenticme.com. I'm also on Facebook, facebook.com/itsauthenticme. And so you can email me to contact@itsauthenticme. I'm kind of very easy to get a hold of. And the name like Kamini Wood, pretty easy to Google and find. So I completely welcome, people reaching out. I love to talk to people and to see how I can support and help people move forward, because I do feel like the more we support one another in this world, the better off we all can move forward and grow as humans. So, yeah.
Nice. I love it. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing about your business and about you and, diving into hard, funny topics. Is there anything
Thank you so much for having me. I've had a lot of fun.
I had fun too. Is there anything you want to leave the listeners with before you go?
Honestly, it goes back to the fact that I truly wholeheartedly believe that each one of us is resilient, and sometimes we just need a little bit of support to remember and to tap into that resilience. And then, of course, the tidbit that I've offered up before, which is that to remember that life happens for us and not to us.
Nice. I love it.
Hey, before you go, I just want to say thank you for tuning in today's episode. And also, if you haven't already, like and subscribe, and make sure you comment and leave a rating for the podcast. Have a good one, you guys.